Rise up!
This is the Rise Up See Red podcast, all about the Arizona Cardinals and the NFL, featuring insider and outsider perspectives. Enjoy the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Now here are your hosts, Jess Root and Seth Cox.
Hello, Arizona Cardinals fans, and welcome to the latest edition of the Rise Up Sea Red podcast, the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. I'm your host, Jess Root from CardsWire.com, the USA Today NFL Wire site covering your Arizona Cardinals. And recording with me on a Tuesday night, episode 517, is co-host Seth Cox from RevengeOfTheBirds.com, SB Nation's Arizona Cardinals site, and also one of the hosts of the original Draft Breakdown podcast. It is the best time of year, in my opinion, to listen to that show. Both the free shows, jumping on as a patron to get their bonus episodes, as you're getting rankings, you're getting, I'm catching up. The one I just listened to when I was at the gym yesterday was Would You Rather, the Would You Rather episode. It was a nice nice discussion about the different skill players, a particular receiver, and guys like that. Would you rather, like, what was it, like Romeo Dunze and those guys was, well, and then you talk about the quarterbacks, Bo Nix and Michael Penix. It doesn't really affect the Cardinals, but it does might affect the Cardinals for trade market. And so anyway,
Right,
that was a good episode.
Well, and exactly, those guys are, two guys that could be available when the Cardinals pick in the second round, and so that could be a spot, a feverish spot to trade up. It's just that time of year where we're kind of in a lull. The names are out there. We know the names now. We're kind of stuck with dealing with waiting at this point, waiting on the NFL Combine, waiting on pro days. It's kind of the boring part of the year where we just feast on random mock drafts every day, and you kind of wait for the big ones, right? Justin and I have really nicknamed them the tastemakers and things of that nature. That's kind of how we deal with it. And the tastemaker dropped a huge one today, right? Daniel Jeremiah dropped his mock draft 2.0, and he does them strategically. He usually does them before the Senior Bowl, before the Combine. He tries to lay out what he's hearing at this juncture, and then you kind of piece together the changes that are occurring as he gathers more information. Because while DJ is a former scout, and the quote unquote head of scouting or the NFL draft analyst for NFL.com, he's also
pretty dialed in.
Yeah, I was going to say kind of a slave to the insider role. And that's why you listen to him. You don't necessarily listen and go, oh, this guy's the best talent evaluator. By the way, he's a fantastic talent evaluator. So I don't want anybody to think that's where I'm going with this. But when he says things about J.J. McCarthy going in the top 10, even if you and I disagree with that,
right? But we don't think, like, that's not saying he thinks he's a top 10 talent. He's hearing that he might get drafted in the top 10.
Right. And so that's why, certain guys over everybody else are the guys you have to listen to, and those guys, when they come out with it, that's when you kind of write it down, you jot it down, and you follow along, and then you go back to your evaluations and just kind of get into it, right? And you're like, okay, what am I missing with JJ McCarthy? And things of that nature. So it'll be interesting to see, but
and right now, kind of the big thing is they're starting to swing this. Like, I've seen it in the simulations on PFF. Daniel Jeremiah's today is, we are starting to see a disappearing of the 3 quarterbacks and 3 picks. And at least for Cardinals fans, we need to prepare ourselves for the real possibility that there's no home run that Marvin Harrison is going to be the pick at number 4, because like all the buzz and all the feeling right now is New England's not going to draft a quarterback. They're going to acquire one, and that'll leave them to take Harrison at the top. Or although, PFF, in all the simulations that I kind of ran on Saturday, they took Malik Neighbors every single time, which was interesting.
Yeah, and that's, it's interesting to see him talk about that, and his wording today was, they opt to go with a veteran. They haven't done that yet. Obviously, we haven't even got to the combine, so all of that stuff is an unknown, right? And so to see that, you just kind of go, okay, well, that must be their first priority, right? Is to go find a veteran quarterback and then make a decision from there. But there's also enough smoke out there right now that,
literally who knows?
Right. Especially February. I mean, we're recording Tuesday night, February 20th, to really judge at this point, right? Like you can't, I mean, you and I both kind of look at it and go, okay, this is, what they're saying. But I mean, we're literally over 60 days away till the draft. And like, we're still what, 3-4 weeks, a little over 3 weeks until the start of free agency. So like all of this is heavy speculation, but it's good to kind of get an idea of what's going on, especially in this time of year when, people can sign the franchise or put the franchise tag on players right now, but that typically never happens on day one of eligibility, right? Like
right.
they tend
it doesn't have to happen till March 5th or whatever.
Yeah. So they tend to try to wait to see if they can get some negotiations done. That way, they don't have to franchise tag, because that just tends to piss players off now. And the last thing you want to do if you're the Kansas City Chiefs is have an angry Chris Jones once again, or an angry L'Jarius Sneed. So you wait, you kind of bide your time and then get into it. So yeah, the mock drafts, especially by the guys dialed in like DJ, are really important's probably a strong word, but they're fun to get into this time of year, because that's really the only information we're getting at this point.
Yeah, and this offseason's been slow. Like,
well, I think a lot of it, and I think you and I talked about it, but it might have been Justin and I on an episode. I do so many podcasts that they tend to blur together, but the opening of gambling on all of these off-season moves has made it.
That was the other show. I remember hearing that.
So it's kind of made it where the insiders aren't getting the same information, because you really can't give that away, right? Like you can't give. I remember last year, I got a tip that the Eagles wanted to draft Jalen Carter, even to the point that they were in negotiations with the Cardinals to move up to 3 to take him. And I was like, okay, that's good to know. And so my friend, who I'm literally is literally at my house watching the draft, went and put $100 on it. And it was like, a plus, I think it was like a plus 1,200 at that point. So he won like $1,300
nice.
On the whole situation. And that's the thing, is like, they don't want that happening. That's not something that they want out there, because one, it shifts markets, but two, they don't want people, cleaning out the betting sites, because, at the end of the day, everybody's in it to make money. And, like we've said before, Vegas wasn't built by losing. So
correct. Well, in this episode, we're not honestly here to talk about mock drafts. We got two major topics we're going to deal with, and one is the major offseason questions facing the Cardinals, and then secondly, as we're still a couple of weeks away from free agency before any trades can happen. But there are some names that are kind of floating around as potential trades, guys that are on kind of the trade block. We'll discuss, are any of them worth pursuing for the Cardinals, especially since they have a slew of draft picks. So let's go ahead and get started with that and start with off-season questions. I wrote about this on Cards Wire. So like there's a post on there. You could see the words in writing. You could see them in print there. But I have the number one question that faces the offseason. And you probably can predict some of them. I think the number one question is about Kyler Murray, but it isn't the same question as it was last year. Obviously last year, can he come back from the injury? We saw he came back. He looked like a player who didn't have an injury. He looked like a player who was learning a new offense, and by the end of the season, you're like, yeah, he's good again. The question is, for me, is will Kyler reach his ceiling again? We've seen the ceiling. There was about a 5-game stretch in 2020. He looked like an MVP. There was like the first half of the season in 2021. Looked like an absolute stud. Like he was gonna go from that, very good quarterback, top 10, top 12, where kind of the guys sit, to bumping himself up to the elite, the Josh Allen, the Patrick Mahomes, Lamar Jackson level. Will he reach that ceiling again? Which he touched. He briefly touched that over a couple of seasons, and then what we've seen from him since then has been above average to pretty good. The end of last season gives me hope that he does reach that. And I don't necessarily say will he do it, but will he ascend? For me, the big question is, does he take, and we've been talking about Kyler Murray literally every year he's been in the league, can he take the next step? Now, he took steps back, but we now need to see from him, since the Cardinals have paid him, they are committing to him, and they believe in him, does he take the next step? Like going into that next stratosphere of like week to week, like dangerous weapon that you don't want to face.
Yeah, and it's interesting to look at it because there was a tweet by Ian Hartitz, IHARTITZ, on X, and he dropped a really impressive information. And he wrote, Cardinals were a top 10 offense in EPA per play, so expected points per play, yards per play, and TD drive percentage, with Kyler Murray under center in weeks 10 through 18 last year. Top 10. Obviously we've talked ad nauseum about the weapons around him, maybe even the offensive line. And so to see those numbers and to see how well he played down the stretch there is really just, it's crazy to think about because when you look at numbers, or when you look at the things that come along with just bulk numbers, and it's something that Jess and I talk about all the time. When we talk stats, we tend to say like, hey, these are his like bulk stats, things like that. And you look at what Kyler did and you're like, it wasn't anything where you're like, yeah, he's a top 10 quarterback in the NFL. But then you kind of dive into all of it, right? The efficiency of it, the way he was able to take a team that was genuinely a bottom 10 team, 5 team in the NFL in all of these stats, even though the bulk numbers didn't look bad. And he was able to raise them to a top 10 team while he's leading them. And you and I have talked a lot about it, right? Like one of the biggest things that we compliment him on was playing off of the run game so well, right? And that excites us in a sense because they did all this without really any what we would consider top tier passing threats, NFL wise. It's not to
At
take
least a receiver. So they
right. That's what I meant. Sorry. Yeah. In receiver wise, and that's not to take away anything from Greg Dortch or rookie Michael Wilson, but that was the reality of it, was not that, the weapons outside weren't great. You and I were incredibly encouraged by the strides Trey McBride made, ended up being one of the 10 best tight ends, maybe even like 7 best tight ends in the NFL, which after year one is a great jump. And then again, you and I really liked what Elijah Higgins brought in a limited capacity with tight end 2 upside, where if God forbid McBride misses 2 to 3 games, you're like, hey, we got a guy that can fill the offensive production role. He's not nearly the blocker that Trey is or anything like that, but he can catch the ball. And so you go into it with Kyler, and I think what gets me excited, I think what gets you excited, what gets guys that are more nerdy NFL guys excited about what Kyler did is because he did all of that without a ton of skill position talent around him. And one of the things that we've talked about is that, they're not going to, in the next year, be San Francisco, where you're talking about all pro level players, at running back, wide receiver, tight end, all, in the unless they do draft Marvin Harrison Jr. and he is just the freak of freaks that, even above what we expect. The expectation of him being a guy that in year one, is an all pro is, let's be honest, is unrealistic. But, you can see Trey McBride flirting with a Pro Bowl. You could see James Conner being a Pro Bowl or flirting with an all pro type thing. But, to have Brock Purdy's supporting cast is probably unrealistic. and then we've talked about it as well. He is not Josh Allen or Patrick Mahomes, where you're going to see him put up historically unreal numbers without a lot of talent around him. But what he has shown is that if you give him a run game, that he is an incredibly efficient quarterback, and he will take that offense to a top 10 level offense. And that is crazy to think that at the end of the year, obviously just the 9 games that Kyler played, right? The 8 games Kyler played, that you're looking at him going, this was a top 10 offense. But statistically it was, and those things are, that's not anything to scoff at. That should give you hope that a full offseason in the system, healthy, right? A full year working with Michael Wilson, a full year of he and Trey McBride and Elijah Higgins getting some work together, improving on what was already good. That should all just be that should just get everybody to the point where they're just like, holy cow, this could be a top 10, 8 to 12 quarterback next year. And then in the next year, we could be talking about a guy that's flirting with top 5 and MVP status. And what people don't get, and I think you and I have talked about this quite a bit, but there's Patrick Mahomes at 1, there's Josh Allen at 2, and then 3 through 14. It's just a different year, right? The year before it was Jalen Hurts, right? Jalen Hurts was the third best quarterback in the NFL. This year it was, Brock Purdy, or it was Lamar Jackson.
And I'd even say, like, I'd even include like 2 through 4 on that same kind of tier are, in addition to Allen, is a healthy Lamar Jackson, and also Aaron Rodgers, because he's still Aaron Rodgers. But
right
after that, it's just it is who's hot that season.
And so you just look at it and you go, Kyler can be one of those guys. And we've seen that, okay, so maybe that guy doesn't slay the king that is freaking Patrick Mahomes. But at the end of the day, are we going to look back at Jalen Hurts if they don't win a Super Bowl and be like, God, that guy just couldn't get it done, because he lost to Patrick Mahomes in the Super Bowl? like if that's the bar, if it's Super Bowl or nothing else, then the only thing you can do, and the only logical thing you can do, is after 3 years, draft another quarterback and then move on from the guy before you pay him, unless he turns out to be the next Patrick Mahomes or Josh Allen, right? Like, you can't just, think about this. You just mentioned Aaron Rodgers. Aaron Rodgers is going to go down as one of the 10 best quarterbacks of all time, and probably creep into that 7 to 5 range. He's won a Super Bowl.
Super Bowl.
He's won one more Super Bowl than Kyler Murray. Like, that's what's baffling about the whole situation, is that people want to just go, well, he hasn't won a Super Bowl. I agree, he has not won a Super Bowl, but if you look at every quarterback in the NFL not named Patrick Mahomes, neither have they. Oh, sorry, Matthew Stafford has. My bad. Unless you want to count Joe Flacco in that mix at this point, but like,
it was a decade ago.
Right. So it's just like, guys, get over it. Like, if this is a team that's not competitive next year, I don't think you'll hear Jess and I, barring, an avalanche of injuries, I don't think you'll hear Jess and I talk down about looking to move on. I really don't. But if they're, if, like you and I have said, if they finish 8-9 or 9-8 and have a top 10 offense, but that defense still is just a year away from being where it needs to be, you and I aren't going to be like, well, he missed the playoffs again, I guess it's time to move on. Because like, it's just, we get it. And he is the most important thing, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And so he's the centerpiece question every single offseason. Outside of Kyler, what is your number one question for the Cardinals in the offseason that they face?
What do they do for the defense? We've gone over what they can do for the offense, and it's fairly simple, right? It's you need a tackle and somebody else at left guard. It doesn't mean that they have to start over Elijah Wilkinson or John Gaines, right? But like, you need another body in there to compete with those guys, hopefully a higher end talent. And then obviously a wide receiver, like we've talked about. But defensively, it's like, where do you start? Where do you end?
Where do you put the focus? Is because unless you do just barely incrementally better talent at every level.
Exactly. You're gonna have better but similar, like, instead of being 28 to 30, you're gonna be 23 to 25. Like, and that's kind of what we're talking about.
Which is an improvement, but I'd rather see them jump into top 20, right?
But to your point, if it's an incremental improvement, but their signings were, a slightly upgraded Josh Woods and, a slightly upgraded Starling Thomas type moves, like you said, for a little bit more money, then that's not really the improvement, right? Because you didn't, like, you can take let's just throw a name out there, the Jeremiah Trotter, the linebacker from Clemson that's being projected in that round 3 range, right? And so they grab him at 64, whatever that pick is. And they grab him and you go, okay, now there's that incremental improvement with the upside that's still coming, right? Because he was a rookie. But if you get another just journeyman off the scrap heap, and and there is incremental improvement, but it's like you said, it's like, okay, so you were better than Josh Wood and Chris Barnes, but there's still no
is that the ceiling?
right. There's still nothing on the horizon to get you to the next step. So it's how do you address that? And you and I know that there will be those free agent kind of journeyman fill-ins. We get that, but where do you put the investment? It doesn't just have to be financially.
Are they going to make even a medium splash somewhere on defense?
Right. And it doesn't have to be in free agency. While you and I would love for a L'Jarius Sneed to be their main focus this offseason,
That'd
right?
Be fantastic.
And you get a guy for 5 years and $80 million and you lock him up. It does. If you end up getting a Nate Wiggins at 27, while not equivalent because we don't know what Nate Wiggins can be, it's still the same type of investment, right? So it's hopefully a 5-year contract on a guy that is going to help your defense. The difference being obviously L'Jarius Sneed is going to be a lockdown corner one on day one, whereas Nate Wiggins, you're going to be like, we probably have to wait, a year and a half to see that, which is fine. But you still, like you said, that investment has to come. It's just how does it come and where does it come and how do they divvy it up, right? Because
they need cover guys. They need pass rushers. They need pass rushers badly, and they need bodies on the interior. So they need it's like the only thing, and they need other linebackers. Like you feel good about Kaiser White and your safeties. Everything else is upgradable.
Yeah, and immediately upgradable too, like you said, like not just like, oh, you could get better. No, it's like, no, this should be fairly straightforward.
Right. My next biggest question is something we've actually talked about on one of our shows, but what's going to happen with Buddha? I'm surprised it hasn't been a topic of conversation here, other than apparently the only topic of conversation about Buddha Baker has happened on this show. And the thing is, we're not trying to drum up drama, but it was drama last offseason. Now, he's got 1 year left on his deal. He has no guaranteed money left. They did give him workout bonus money, which means that he has money tied into being at the offseason program, which he wasn't last year. So I wonder if I'm sure that was strategic. But ultimately, I am certain one of two things are going to happen. He's going to get an extension or he's going to be traded. And if he's going to be traded, then it will happen in the next month and a half, right? It'll happen before the draft. It's
got to happen before the draft. Like, it has to. You can't go into the draft with this looming. It could be a draft day type of trade, perhaps. I mean, but again, it's one of those things too where you wonder what the value is, and I do wonder if why we haven't heard anything is everybody's kind of waiting to see what the value is. We hit on it, a couple months ago, or about a month and a half ago, when we talked about all the pending free agents and things of that nature. But when you look at just the overall breakdown of NFL free agents to be, the reality is that you have a bunch of younger. I mean, I don't mean this in a negative way, so I don't want fans to take this in a negative way, but that have been better more recently, free agents that are going to command probably right around what he has commanded. And so that's where the question, so, like Antoine Winfield Jr. is probably the best example. I think he's 2 years younger than Buddha. He's coming out. He's the the reigning all pro for that position. His number comes in at 18 million. Is that what the expectation is for Buddha and his camp? And if it is, like you just said, that's probably not that's probably not the best way to invest if you're the Cardinals,
Well,
right?
especially if you're trying to improve the defense. I mean, you had really good safety play last season when Buda and Jalen were playing, and you were still a bad defense. And so that you have to decide: are you committing to the player more than improving the defense, or are you pay the player who is the face of the franchise, the heart and soul of the defense, is the best defensive player on that team when healthy, or and then in by so doing, you are betting heavily on the young players that you drafted.
Right. And you're basically, we've talked about this. Unfortunately for the Cardinals, they've invested so heavily in the safety position, which on a good defense makes a lot of difference, but on a bad defense just racks up a lot of tackles, unfortunately. and that's kind of where it's been for them. Yeah, so that's an interesting one. I think, my final one is, and it's one that has been brought up by a bunch of people outside, and I'm interested in your opinion of it. Can they continue to pay Matt Prater?
Ooh.
Like, is Prater worth is a strong word, because I think you and I would agree that he has proven that he is worth his salary. But at the same time, you have to look at it and you say the Cardinals are paying him just under $5 million.
Cap wise.
Cap wise, yeah.
He's going to make $3.5 million this coming season.
Right. And so his cap hits 4.75. If they trade or cut him, they save that full $3.5 million. They're only on the hook for the 1.25 that they've spread out. So then the other thing is, can you replace him at less than 2.25 million, right? Because you have to replace him and you have to get a guy that's as good, and it has to be at least what you're saving, right? Like you can't go pay a guy, because that's one of the things that we've kind of talked about quite a bit, is that their dead money dropped from like 70 million this year to right around 15 million, but you don't want more of the same, right? So, but with Prater, the thing is with Prater, and you just have to acknowledge this, they're playing with fire.
Right.
It's not that he's been bad or anything like that.
And the thing is, like, you watch him kick, he hasn't lost leg. So that you've got that. But the one thing that happened, obviously, we joke that he was following the script when he missed that game-winning field goal. That was a significant miss, because you know what that was for him? That was literally the very first game-winning field goal at the end of a game, like when the last 2 minutes or an overtime, that he'd ever missed in his entire career. That was the first one.
And we've seen, just in sports in general, but especially football, that when guys do lose it at a specific age, it tends to go quickly. It's not one of those situations where they lose it and then they get it back the next year. And so you can go through a bevy of them. David Akers, was an all-pro in Philly and San Francisco, and then was in San Francisco again, and he dropped a little bit, and then he went to Detroit and kind of fell apart, but that year in San Francisco, he was literally a Pro Bowler and an All-Pro, and then at 37, and then at 38, his field goal percentage dropped to a career low. And so it's not saying that you have to make a move or anything of that nature. It's just when these guys get to that age, it typically goes quick. And so, if you're looking at it, how do you address it? Because every kicker that hits 40, they they very rarely maintain what their career averages are.
And he will be age 40 next season.
Yeah, and so that's why I brought it up. Again, it's not like we're pushing for it. It's not like we're saying actively like they need to move on from Matt Prater. It's just a question. I mean, it's a genuine question of like a guy that turns like the entire season will be 40 years old.
Yes.
And he is, ends up being one of the highest paid kickers in the league. Like, is that, again, kind of like we've talked about with Buddha, is that a smart way of doing it? So, we'll see how that all pans out.
And my last question is kind of twofold. It's what they do with the contracts of DJ Humphries and James Conner for two very different reasons. Humphries, who is, tore his ACL, he has no injury guarantee. He could be cut. It would save the Cardinals $9 million. They're going to need to, like, as it is, they need to address tackle anyway because he's out till, if we look at the timeline, he's going to be out till December at least. And the hope is he can maybe come back late in the year to showcase something. Do they cut him just to save the money? Would they do that to an injured captain who wasn't as good as he was before he got hurt in 2022, but he also wasn't terrible. We both said that would be a bad look for the team, but it's definitely a business move that's happened. And so, or do they keep him on the team and then use him to trade in 2025? Because it's not like it's different. If he were a free agent after 2024 and he's coming back for an injury, I could see it, as bad as it would look. I could see the value, because if you're not going to have him all next year anyway, you could just save the money. They're going to have to address tackle anyway. And so I'll be interested to see what they do there. And then James Conner, entering the last year of his deal, the most important player on the Cardinals offense. Like, okay, Kyler's the most important. Last season, James Conner was the best player, by far the most impactful. He was the heart and soul of that offense. He's only got 1 year left on his deal. What do they do with his contract? Because you feel like
I think
you have to extend him, but
right. But I also think
I think
you hit a great question on this, and not just about either guy individually, but it becomes about who you are as a franchise, right? And what I mean by that is you nailed it. I mean, James Conner was literally the best offensive player last year. I don't really think anybody can argue it. If you want to, you can get at Jess on Twitter at Senior Jess Root and argue with him. But with DJ, it's like, how will the locker room respond? And is that a move that would divide the locker room, or is that a move where the locker room would be like, no, we get it, it's a business, and he, unfortunately for him, he just got injured at the wrong time. And so, it's callous, it's cold, it's all of that stuff that we hate about the NFL. But it's also the NFL and how it kind of functions, right? And so how would that play out? Whereas Connor, I just don't think you can have him playing as kind of a lame duck running back. And I don't worry about him being like, I'm going to hold out, because I don't know if he has that in his DNA. Like that guy's just wired differently than most people, right? But to your point, you're talking about the guy that was the heart and soul of the offense. And that gets to other players where they go, well, if they're not going to take care of James,
who are they going to take care of?
Right. Like, would they really take care of, because like I didn't do what he did. And so, it's going to be interesting, because I think it's going to be it could be franchise defining. I don't mean to speak hyperbolically, right? But like, it really could define this whole regime at this point, with how they're going to deal with all of this. Because are they going to be the Patriots and they're like, nope, we have our guy in Kyler? And again, I'm not comparing Kyler to Tom Brady. Don't don't get your panties in a bunch or anything, anybody. But like, is that where they're gonna be like, nope, that's our, and then everybody else is, we churn and burn those guys. If you don't want to fall in, and I don't want to say in line, but fall in, or are you, or are they going to kind of finagle both sides of it and be like, no, we take care of the guys that matter the most, and that's how we're going to do it.
Coming up next on the Rise Up Seaward podcast, Best of Cardinals Talk on the Web, we move to our final segment, and as we'll deal with trade guys. The Cardinals aren't connected to any of them, but the guys that could be traded, should the Cardinals be looking at those guys? That's coming up next on Rise Up Sea-Red. We're back on the Rise of Sea-Red podcast, Best of Cardinals Talk on the Web, as we are still weeks away from the actual league year when trades can happen, but we were used to in years past of trades being agreed to in advance, which you can do. You can negotiate trades. They can't take effect until the new league year. There are a few names out there, and we talked about one, obviously. We talked about Hassan Reddick, a situation where he would like a contract with Philly, but Philly just said, you have permission to seek a trade. He came out like, I did not request a trade. I want to play here, but business. And we discussed that, so we can kind of deal with that again. Hassan Reddick, drafted by the Cardinals, he has been incredibly productive. You cannot deny the production. He's had 4 straight double-digit sack seasons. It's a position of extreme need for the Cardinals, and there's familiarity because he was coached by Nick Rallis and Jonathan Gannon. So there's a perfect match there. It's just a matter of price. But we kind of said in the show I think it was last week or the week before, that as nice as that is, it would be you worry a little bit about it. That's not a home run. That there is some risk to that because of where he's at his age-wise, right?
Yeah, and that's where I'm at with the whole thing. I love the player. I love what he's accomplished in the league. I love, the man he's become in the league. I just don't think you can invest what it's going to take, which is probably a day 2 pick and then a large contract. I mean, if we're talking a 27, if we're talking a Buddha type of age guy, and I know you're going to say, then why wouldn't you just keep Buddha? Those are 2 different positions at this point. Like, we have to call it what it is, and we have to compare apples to apples. And just at this rate, this team needs a Hassan Reddick more than Hassan Reddick like player more than they do a Buddha Baker type player, if they want to take that next step. So, all of those things considered, it's just one of those things that I just don't think that what the cost would make sense. Now, let's just say they do it. I'm not going to complain at all. I'm going to be like, oh, they're genuinely going for it.
Yeah.
But doesn't it seem like if they did that is now if he gets cut and they sign him, completely different thing. But if they trade for him, doesn't that seem kind of like the old Cardinals, like, when they traded for Rodney Hudson when they were just going to cut him?
Yeah.
And the Cardinals were like, no, we got to get him. And it's like, let's give up, a top 100 pick for a guy that literally nobody in the NFL wanted to give up anything for. So that's where I'm at. Like, if you let another team that's a little closer kind of try to make that investment, especially, with the draft capital, and then if it comes out that he's able to be, signed off the free market, then absolutely go after him.
The names that are, I'll throw some names out there, and there are a couple quarterbacks, and we're just going to poo-poo those because we know the Cardinals aren't going to trade for quarterback, but obviously names of guys that could be on the move: Justin Fields, Chicago; Mac Jones, New England. Some other interesting names, though, in addition to Hassan Reddick: San Francisco 49ers receiver Brandon Ayuk, Stephon Diggs out of Buffalo, another receiver. You could go with Khalil Mack the big-time pass rusher with the Chargers. Saquon Barkley, that's kind of whispers around there. Maybe they could franchise and trade him like the Packers did with Devontae Adams. You look, the Saints have cap problems. Ty Matthew, Alvin Kamara could be guys that you look at, and as we kind of look at that, the receivers are the most intriguing, right? Because they need receivers. Brandon Ayuk, for me, is the most interesting one, and a one I'll just freely admit. It would literally never happen, but not because of interest or fit or anything like that. He plays in the NFC West. There isn't any way, I don't believe there's any way in the world that the 49ers would trade Ayuk to the Cardinals. But, I mean, Ayuk proved to be a legit number one receiver. He would be a perfect fit in this offense for his skill set. There is also, of course, he played at Arizona State. Like that would be a natural fit here. And he's at the age now. It would be like when the Cardinals traded for it. Not quite. It would be like trading for Hollywood a year later because he's playing this next season. He's under contract for the fifth-year option. And that is what Hollywood was playing on this year, and they had traded for him the year before. But he is at that age. You could get cost control this year, extend him, and to be your legit number one. It would take a first-round pick for sure. It would probably take the 27. But then you could also you could trade for him, draft a receiver at the top, and what you have? You have both a big-time now receiver, a potential star in whether it's Marvin Harrison, Malik Neighbors, Romeo Dunze, any of those guys, and then you've got your slot guys. So you've got Rondell Moore, you've got Greg Dortch, and if they're your number 3, number 4, and you've got Michael Wilson, that's just wow. And so if there were a way to trade for Brandon Ayuk, that would, of all the guys that are on this, that in potential trade guys, Ayuk is that's the guy to prioritize, even though there's no way in the world the 49ers would trade him to the Cardinals.
No, and you're right. There's just no way, but it's, there's nothing wrong with checking in on the cost. The worst thing that happens is they tell you no. I mean, that's obviously the first thing. And then the second thing is, I actually reached out to a buddy of mine that it has some good intel on the Niners. And I just legit asked him, like, is this legit? Like, are they really thinking, or could he be traded? I got to get to my text. Hold on. He said, first it would be a mistake. He said all their stars are at or are approaching 30 and their bodies are broken. Plus they're all free agents after 25. They can restructure some guys to create the space they need. They should be okay. And he said, I'm sure they've seen the initial offer. He's probably going to get lowballed if he hasn't already. No. So that's where this is all kind of stemming from, is that it sounds like the Niners are trying to have their cake and eat it too, meaning, we mentioned the Patriot way. That's what they're trying to, hey, you're playing on the best team in the NFC. This is the best team that gives you the best shot to win a Super Bowl. Don't you want to sacrifice?
Yeah. No, and I'd love to point there's something out that the 49ers are used to having this sort of acrimony, this sort of conflict. Last offseason, Nick Bosa. They had it with Deebo Samuel. In fact, Deebo's was bad until they finally paid him. George Kittle obviously was they had the contract issue, but he was much less confrontational about it. But, this feels like the out of the Deebo Samuel playbook, right?
Yeah, and to that point, like to that point, you look at it like, why wouldn't Samuel be on the block? And it's probably because his market's going to be substantially less due to all the aforementioned things like age, wear and tear, and then the fact that he's already under a substantial contract. So those are things that they've got to figure out. And they truly are champagne problems. Like, oh my gosh, our other fantastic all pro level wide receiver needs to get paid. Oh no, we're so, it's so hard to be us, the 49ers. But at the same time, it is one of those situations where that's where they're at right now. Like, that's where this whole situation is. So they got to find a way to deal with it. And if you're the Cardinals, like you said, the chances of it happening are slim and none, but you've got 27. The worst that they can do is tell you no. So you go, hey, here's pick 27. What do you guys think? And when they say no, thank you, be like, okay, if you guys don't get a better offer, we'll be here. And again, the worst that they can say is no. And and they've got to figure it out from that point. But I did ask a buddy of mine. I said, what would you do if they traded for Ayuk? Like, whether it's 27 or I think 34, 35, whatever the second round pick is, like, would you be on board with that? And his initial like gut knee jerk was no, I wouldn't do it. But then it's like, if you got Ayuk, you address obviously one of the needs and probably the biggest need, but you also then, as long as you retain 27 and 35 are, I don't want to say negligible, the
probably
difference.
The same tier player.
But yeah, you're picking from the same 8-person pool. And so if that's how you kind of refocus it, you go, dang, that really just opens up everything you could do it for, including trade down, right? And and you're getting a younger all pro receiver. Yeah, he's not going to be 21 like Marvin Harrison,
but he's also he's been a higher producing receiver than when they traded for Hollywood. Also.
Right. So it's it's a great question, Jess, and I wish there was more of a chance that it would happen, but like you said,
like,
I think
if he played in Jacksonville, for example, then there'd be a chance.
Right. If he played, I mean, if the Cardinals were in the AFC West, it was different. I don't know what they would do with any NFC team, quite frankly. And I've heard that they wouldn't even acknowledge like trading him to like Kansas City, because that's, in their view, their main rival, and why help them get better. So, it makes it tough, but yeah, I think that's a great bar debate question. If you're the Cardinals, like if you knew you could do it for 27, and then obviously you're paying them the $125 million over 5 years, or whatever outrageous thing they're getting at this point, wide receivers are, would you do it? And that's a more fun debate, and that's why I think it's a great question.
What about a guy like Khalil Mack? He is aging, but still great. He's 30. He's going to play his age 33 season, but he's coming off of a 17 sack season. It's a position now. Granted, I will say this: an ideal scenario for Mack would be to be traded somewhere where he can win a title, obviously. However, he would immediately level up that Cardinals defense, even at age 33. Because, remember, the number one sack guy in 2023 for the Cardinals was Dennis Gardeck. And we love ourselves in Dennis Gardeck. He's not that much of a and we know the Cardinals had one sack over the final 6 games of the seaon, and that one sack wasn't really a sack. It was Justin Fields running out of bounds at the line of scrimmage when Dennis Gardeck was, he got that 6th sack not having to make a tackle. Khalil Mack, it's 33 years old. He doesn't fit the timeline, right? Like if you, unless you think that the Cardinals are going to compete and take a big step in the next 2 seasons. And I believe he is a free agent after this season. So maybe you would trade for him given a 1-year extension. But he doesn't make perfect sense. But my goodness, wouldn't it significantly upgrade their defense?
Yeah, and if it's true that they're kind of looking to move on from guys, the guy I would call about would be Bosa. Obviously, much younger, but like you said, would be and probably costs a lot more, right? Probably,
yeah,
probably costs a lot more. But like you said, there is the reality that if you trade for Mac, the first thing you're doing is extending him, right? Because you're not going to give up what would probably equate to probably like pick 90. And I know people will be like, that's not very much, but you got to remember he's going to be 34
years old, and he's got 1 year left on his deal. Sorry.
So you're not going to give him, you're not going to give them a 2 and definitely not a 1 to have the right to extend a 33-year-old guy. So I think from that perspective, it makes sense. I just don't think that. I think he would be more of, and obviously we can't, see into the future, but like if they're competing and the Chargers are looking to sell around the trade deadline, I think that's where he makes more sense for them. I just don't know if he makes more as much sense right now.
Yeah,
again, sense. if you could get him for like 104, and I doubt the Chargers would do that, but if you could get him for 104, I could see that because he does have an astronomical cap hit of $38.5 million. So,
he would only count 17.5 for the Cardinals because
right.
they would be on the hook for is his salary.
Right. So literally they would save $23.25 million. And by the way, if they did that, they would still be $10 million over the cap. So
I do actually have to. So the Cardinals would probably want to do something. He does have a $5.5 million roster bonus coming up, which is actually kind of why this is a question because there is basically $23 million tied up in Mac this year, and the Chargers are probably going to be motivated to trade him, and whoever trades for him either is on trying to make a championship run or is going to redo that deal so that they don't have $23 million against the cap this year.
Yeah, and it does make sense. I mean, it like you said, all of that would be great, but at the end of the day, too, you have to look at it through the entirety of this situation. So I think for this, if you got him for a 4th and you could extend him, for $20 million next year, I wouldn't be against it, but it's just it would have to you would have to get him for the right price. You cannot overpay for him in any way, shape, or form.
Also, what about Stephon Diggs? This is the one that, while I am all in on like a Brandon Ayuk type trade, I am not all in on a Stephon Diggs. This is, they cut DeAndre Hopkins. If they were to go trade for Stephon Diggs, who's basically DeAndre Hopkins at this timeline, for me, that doesn't make sense. Would he absolutely be a game changer for this offense? Absolutely.
But that's the thing, Jess. I don't know how much he has been a game changer the last couple of years. Now, don't get me wrong. He put up great numbers last year or in 2022. I mean, over 1,400 yards receiving and 11 touchdowns. But this year he had 107 receptions for just under 1,200 yards and 8 touchdowns. And
he's going to be age 31 this year, which is that magical stop. Other than Larry Fitzgerald and Jerry Rice, it is that age where receivers stop producing.
Yeah, and it's one of those things that while you definitely need an upgrade and addition at wide receiver, it's probably not the best to go for a guy that's, let's be honest, disgruntled playing in Buffalo right now. Like it'd be different again if it's if it mimics or mirrors the DeAndre Hopkins situation and he ends up being a guy that can't get traded anywhere, that gets released and then can't get signed anywhere, and then comes to Arizona to kind of help buoy his numbers and things like that. But I don't know if you can give up anything for him with where he's at and how disgruntled he seems to be. I'm not going to say he is, but he seems to be with an organization that
is 2027. Holy cow.
Yeah. But let's be honest, he's at in just the scope of everything, he's in a better situation right now than he would be coming to Arizona. And if he's that unhappy, allegedly in Buffalo, why would he want to be here?
Yeah, that doesn't make any sense. A couple other names out there, Tyrann Mathieu, Alvin Kamara, either of those, have any sort of buzz to it if they come available?
No, I love Tyrann, but like they need another safety that doesn't play as a true free safety. Like they need a hole in their head at this point.
You had an interesting player in mind, and this is an intriguing one. Denver Broncos cornerback Pat Surtain. Not because they're trying to get rid of him, but say Denver wants to trade up for a quarterback, and they offer Surtain for, say, number 4. Surtain's one of the absolute best cornerbacks in the NFL. Would be an immediate game changer on that Cardinals defense. This is the question: is he worth the number 4 pick, or would the Cardinals need more to move up?
Yeah, that's a great one, and why I thought it was a good, again, bar debate, right? Like you're talking about a 24-year-old. He'll be 24 this year, so he'll play the entire next season as 24-year-old. You're talking about a 24-year-old, 2-time Pro Bowl, 1-time All-Pro corner.
You get the 5th-year option in 2025.
You have the 5th-year option. You're definitely going to extend him. There's zero question. He is a legitimate, unquestionable cornerstone piece of any NFL team that he gets traded to, if that's what they decide to do. And I get it. The idea of trading the 4th overall pick for a known commodity is much less sexy and fun than trading or than debating the merits of drafting, Marvin Harrison or Malik Neighbors or Joe Alt or trading down or, yada, yada. But at the end of the day, if you can get a guy like Surtain and like an additional 2nd round type of pick or even a day 2 pick, I just think it's such a slam dunk with what he is as a player that it would be hard not to. So if you ended up with Surtain and the 76 overall pick, I honestly wouldn't have a problem with that. Now I get the idea of like, oh, they need more, but I mean, we're talking about a known commodity, a known superstar, and the only thing you lose out on is a lottery ticket. And so, that's the thing is like, I know everybody loves the lottery ticket, but is that lottery ticket going to be a $200 million lottery ticket, or is it going to be a $100 million lottery ticket, or is it going to be a bust, where you just buy more lottery tickets? Like that's what the question is. And yeah, it might just be a situation where Patrick Surtain is a $200 million lottery ticket. And so you pass up on potentially getting that, $500 million or $1 billion lottery ticket. But man, having that $250 million is not going to be a bad thing. And I don't think anybody would complain about it. And so that's why I look at it the way I do, because I just don't see the point. I'm always team trade for young proven talent over taking the chance on the opposite.
Right, because you're going to get you get that contract, you're going to have him for his prime.
Potentially, I mean, you should potentially get him.
So you've already got the difference. Like you've already got him at you don't have to develop him more. He's already there.
Right.
And so you don't need to have patience for what he'll become. He's already there. He's already top of the league. And you get that level for the next 4 or 5 years.
Well, and theoretically, just using that, so you trade that, you get him year 4, and then and I know it's not how it works, but you obviously pick up his 5th year, and then you basically extend that out, and you extend him for another 5 years to his age 30.
Yeah.
And then, like you said, you have him for his entire prime of his career. Never missed a game. I mean, there's just not many guys in the league that are like him. And if you have a chance to get that guy immediately, I just am the type of guy that's like, yeah, do it immediately. Like you literally don't have a question about it, and now you've improved your team immensely, and you don't have to hope. Like obviously you expect Marvin Harrison Jr. or Joe Alt or any of these guys to be very good, but you don't have to worry about it because you know that they are.
Yeah, it seems like a slam dunk. So with that, we will wrap up this edition of the Rise Up C-Red podcast, Best of Cardinals Talk on Web. It's episode 517. We will do one more show this week, and then I think what we'll do next week. So we've got a couple things to talk about on our Thursday night show. We'll come back probably next week. It'll be the start of the combine. We won't talk combine. We will save that. It's the way things are lining up. This sounds like next week we should do our free agency previews. Following that, we'll probably have Seth with Justin Higdon. So it'll basically be a Rise of C-Red original draft breakdown podcast team up to talk about the combine, and then we will actually hit in the free agency. So that's Seth Cox. I'm Jess Rube. We'll be back in a couple of days, and then again next week. Thanks for listening.
Thanks for listening to the latest edition of the Rise Up C-Red podcast. Listen to previous episodes and subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher Radio, Audioboom, or many other podcast platforms so shows are delivered directly to your mobile device. Please give the show a 5-star rating and always support the sponsors who support the show. We'll be back soon for the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Rise Up Red C, be Red C-Red, and of course, Rise Up C-Red.